All right, everybody, welcome to Tesla Today. So a lot of great news that came out just this weekend. First of all, it seems like Tesla competitors continue to shoot themselves in the foot, with the union for GM looking for 40% pay increases, while at the same time they want to reduce the number of hours worked to 32 hours per week. Lucid's reservations seem to have just fallen off the cliff for some reason. It's vanished. Meanwhile, prices for lithium has dramatically dropped. And a surprising question, can you actually buy a Tesla Model 3 for just $20,000? Where, well, apparently in Colorado, you can. So today we have Jeff Lutz with us. Jeff is a supply chain executive and C-level and chief quality officer for multiple Fortune 100 companies. He's now running his own consulting firm, and he partners with multiple mega cap tech companies on supply chain and product cost structure. Welcome, Jeff. I appreciate you joining me every Monday.
Great to be with you.
This is great. Awesome. Wonderful. Let's go. So first of all, this news came out just a few days ago, and it said that General Motors, so first of all, this CFRA analyst said it's a complete downgrade from hold to strong sell, because what the news came out was that the UAW, the current UAW, the union, they're in contracts right now. It expires on September 14th, and they're reportedly seeking a 40% wage increase. This will be 20% upon ratification, and 32-hour work week among various demands. And so there's a new president of the UAW, Sean Fain, and he appears to be aggressive and eager to make his mark. And of course, it's going to hit their earnings. So you replied saying, UAW clown face, we want to work 80% of the hours we used to for just 20% more pay. And then you said this one as well, which is, the bears here saying Tesla's having a price war with itself. UAW, hold my beer. We want to work 20% hours and make 40% more. Meanwhile, the Chinese and the Korean automakers are just laughing their heads to the bank. I love that. And it says here, you put down this screenshot of 1 week strike cost is massive for GM and Ford and Stellantis. So what's going to happen, Jeff? Tell me what's all this is about.
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors here at play. So obviously this new UAW president wants to make their mark. I mean, inflation has been hurting the U.S. worker. So should auto workers be getting increases? Yeah, absolutely. They work hard. These are American companies. It's very important to the United States. But when you look at the list of demands, obviously this is a negotiation. This is the opening kind of salvo from the UAW. And by the way, there's a lot of media that the UAW puts out. There's, they post, Jim Farley's annual compensation. They post Mary Barra's annual compensation. They post the net profits. They're on poster boards behind them. When the UAW is speaking, they're making, tens of billions of dollars of profits. The auto companies, they've had a great first half, and they're basically saying like, we want more of that to spread to the labor pool. And obviously there should be some increases as these companies are doing better. The question is how does this position the United States to compete in an ever increasingly competitive auto market? We've seen the Chinese go from essentially nothing to now not only powerhouses within China, where they're actually crowding out the European and U.S. automakers that used to be there and be dominant. And now they're going abroad and they're shipping abroad. You see what happening with BYD, XPeng, NIO, and so forth. So if you have to look at this and then of course you have the rise of Hyundai, Kia, and out of Korea, and you have to look at this on a global scale and say, well, where is this going? And if you have a union, we're not going to get too far into should you unionize or not, but you have this union in the middle, which is a vacuum in terms of money. There's money that have to go to these unions. There's dues that go from the labor pool to the unions, and then the companies pay these unions as well. So this is this is in the compensation chain. This is in the this is in the unit economics of every vehicle, or the cost of a union. If you think about it, of every vehicle, non-Tesla vehicle, non-Toyota vehicle, basically, every non-union vehicle, or every union vehicle made in the U.S. has this union cost in it. So where does this leave us? How competitive does it leave the big three? GM, Ford, and Stellantis, probably not in a good position after this. So this is where you see the analyst downgrades coming in. And if you look at the list of demands, there's a long list. There's probably about 10 different things they're looking for, including coverage in case there are work stoppages for demand, work stoppages for supply. There were many work stoppages over the last 3 years for supply related issues. And they want the workers to be getting paid. And basically what will happen is they will want the big three contributing to a fund that would be available. So if there are work stoppages, the workers can actually get paid. So it's the worst thing, because usually when you don't have work in a factory, you send the labor home to save the money. So you don't just have your fixed costs piling in and labor piling on top. And now they want this fund. So there's a lot of things that are really bad about this, but in the end, it really leaves, I think the UAW has to be careful not to, if they win this so far outright, they may leave a very damaged big three auto, behind. And in a couple of years, it'll just be inevitable that they're struggling from an economics perspective. So I think when I look at this situation, and then I look at the position Tesla is in, now let's break it down to EVs. The new battery factories that are opening up in the U.S. from SK and Ford, Cattle and Ford, and then Ultium and GM. Right now, these are not unionized shops, and UAW actually wants to unionize them, or they want to self-unionize as well. So what's that going to do to the cost per kilowatt hour of these factories that right now they're not even ramped up, and GM's struggling to physically get them ramped up. And now you're going to take the economic structure and then weigh the union piece on top of it. So where this leaves not only ICE auto, but also where it leaves EV, it really leaves them in a weakened position. So it's going to be interesting how this plays out over the next, call it 30 days.
Yeah. I'm actually not anti-union. I used to be a union worker 20, 30 years ago. It's closer to 30 years now. But it seems to be a business model that's sort of a vestige in the past. I think Tesla now motivates through stock incentives. And so what do you think, though? I mean, with all these headwinds that these legacy automakers have, union being one of them, which is pretty massive. Then there's the dealer network. There's the business model where they do by parts. And then you've got the transition from ICE to EV. How big of a deal is the union, do you think, when it comes to all these major problems? Which one is the worst?
Well, throw in all the leases expiring of all the cars that were sold during the pandemic years at very high costs, and now the residual values are much lower. So you put all that in, you put the union in, and then you put everything else you discussed, and they've got these weights. They're like jogging with a weighted vest on, and weights around their ankles, and they're in a very difficult position. It's one thing after another, and right now they don't have the unit economics cost structure for EV in the first place to even compete. And then when you throw this on top of it, it just puts them in. Ford already just added $3 billion more of losses for EV this year. They're the only ones breaking it out. So it's interesting. It's a mixed bag. So in this first half, it was very interesting. Tesla took their lumps on the MSRP side. They took their lumps on gross margins. They took it on operating margin. We hope this is a trough period. It may last through this current quarter. But there's definitely going to be gross margin and operating margin headwinds for the big three coming out of this negotiation. So I think that's where this is going, and that's why the downgrades are rolling in. And it's getting more difficult right now for the U.S. consumer as well, with what's happening with interest rates. It looks like it could be higher for longer. And how long is this pent up demand, where the U.S. auto market is, doing okay, doing quite well, but how long is that pent up demand going to be there at the higher interest rates? And now, so the one point I wanted to make on the union side, they're talking about 150,000 UAW workers potentially going on strike. They want to hit the big three all at the same time, but it's actually much bigger than that. When you go look at the supply chain, the United States supply chain, and even the supply chain abroad, but there's up to, I think, close to over 3 million auto workers when you go through the entire supply chain. And that's not including ancillary businesses that support, restaurants and so forth that work in these big towns or these big auto towns. So you've got a labor pool of about 3 million people in the United States that could be impacted by a shutdown. So this is a big deal. This could be, one of the events that could trigger Fed action too. If this many people go out of the labor force for an extended period of time, what are the implications? So there's a lot riding on this politically. There's a lot riding on this economically, and there's certainly for the auto market. There's a lot riding on because there's just so many people involved in the labor pool related to the U.S. auto market.
Okay. Thanks for breaking that down. That is, I didn't think of it as that big of a deal. And then for another show, we will talk about what happens when bots start to take away some of these people's jobs and it continues to grow. So that's the future. All right, Jeff, thank you for that. Now, this is a nice way to put everything in context. Gary Black tweeted this out, said that with Tesla's revenues expected by Wall Street to grow by 24% per year, that's actually in our minds lower than what we think it's higher than what Wall Street says between 2023 and 2027. But GM and Ford, they're only expected to grow by 4% and 2% each. So Tesla's revenues will pass Ford in 2026 and GM in 2027. And of course, we already know that Tesla generates more net income already today. So here's a nice little table and graph. On the top is the revenue trailing 12 months. And looks like that the black is General Motors, the orange red is Ford, and the blue is Tesla. So you can see here that that's where it is today, but by 2026, we'll pass these guys. And in net income, we're already past that. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah. When we looked at this on the last show too, the way to comp the big auto in the US for sure is to always look at it, even going out to 2019 pre-COVID. And what you'll see is essentially it's kind of, there's a peak, but it's essentially, it's flat. And the units are about flat to 10% down over that period. So they're actually not growing in units. What's helped them is the COVID economies and the fact that everything was elevated in price and inflation actually helps revenue for companies. And it's certainly helped the auto companies, and it helped all their suppliers as well. But that's going to be wrung out of the system here, especially when you have a competitor like Tesla in the mix and with their offerings. That's going to be wrung out here over the next several quarters. That I believe that party is just there. There's a little bit of like afterburn or glow that's still happening where people are still paying those prices. But I think that's going to be run out of the system here pretty soon. So that's what's happening. Flat to negative on units over since pre-pandemic. And what's buoyed them is that they've been able to increase MSRPs for basically the same vehicles, the same featured vehicles. They're not really offering anything new to consumers. So I think that's where this falls apart. Now Tesla, the 24%, that's that's on the low end. I think that's Tesla not executing almost, even though that would be great growth. That would put them in terms of mega cap companies, it would put them in the top 3 in terms of annual growth. They're already number 1 in terms of revenue growth of all the mega cap companies. And that 24% growth would put them, in the top 3 for sure. But we think it's going to be much higher. We think they're undercalling energy. We actually think they're undercalling auto. So we think that 24% number is actually low. What I'd like to see Tesla do is I'd like to see Tesla be very serious, maybe coming into the fourth quarter. Now they restart these factories up and they're at the higher run rates in the factories. They're introducing the new products. I know there's a little bit of a wait with the new product introduction, but the volumes on those new products should be relatively lower. The Model Y should be very stable. I'd like to see them get operating margins back into the double digits and go get that number going back up into the mid-teens for operating margin and get gross margins over 20%. And then look in the next year. I think it's really important to keep those hardware margins strong and increasing in strength because they should. They have all the leverage within the supply base. They're not going on strike. They have the number 1 selling models. There's no reason why Tesla shouldn't be up on the upswing come Q4 of this year.
Yeah, so just by looking at this again, it's just weird to me that the expectation is Tesla's revenues only to grow 24% per year between 2023 and 2027. And of course, the other shocking thing is GM and Ford are not expected to grow at all their revenues. But 24%, Jeff, I mean, I know you just addressed it, but it seems very low when you've got the Cybertruck, you've got the Model 3 revision, you've got them by 2025, you should have the compact car, you got the energy, you've got maybe even a little bit of the bots, you got more semi. I mean, I don't know why it's only going to be 20%. Just the cars alone. I mean, I'm still
Yeah.
fully expecting 50%
Yeah.
growth. I don't know. And they've got several gigafactories. Giga Mexico will be up at that point. And then the Giga Texas and Berlin will be in full scale by that point. So that's really low. So I expect us to surpass GM and Ford revenue, not in 2026 and 27, but possibly even 2025. So
yeah, the revenue should grow. The operating margins will be under pressure as they ramp new factories, right? The gross margins will be under a bit of pressure as they ramp new factories, but the revenue growth should be there.
Right.
Yeah,
revenue should grow easily. Okay.
absolutely.
So what happened to Lucid, Jeff? What happened? So 5 months ago, Lucid apparently had 28,000 reservations. They only sold 22,800. All of a sudden, 90% of those reservations have mysteriously disappeared. Okay. So what happened here? If you take a look at this, as of February 21st, 2023, so that's 5 months ago, it said here on their stats 28,000 reservations. Then now, if you order a Lucid, it says here available in 2 weeks. Available in 2 weeks, Jeff. What is going on? People just decided they don't want it. I mean, look at the price point. We got what else do you think might have happened?
They just changed their prices this weekend. I think they have their earnings today. And they'll probably be able to get through some of that inventory. But as a buyer of vehicles in this tier, and I've owned Model S's for the last 10 years. First off, the price points that they previously had these vehicles at were just, they were significantly higher than a Model S, and you weren't getting Model S specs for, at least for acceleration. You didn't have the promise of full self-driving, or just the ability, the current performance of full self-driving beta today. You don't have it with that vehicle. And then I would be concerned if I put myself in a consumer's shoes, and they're obviously struggling. They're getting cash infusions from the Saudis. I would be concerned that, are they going to be able to warranty the $100,000 purchase I made? Are they going to be able to keep up with the parts? Are they going to be able to fix my vehicle? Where am I going to get my vehicle fixed? Right now, if I need something done on my Tesla, I go into the app, I punch in what I need to have done, and they're trying to do the repair at my home in my garage, and they'll get there usually within a day, sometimes the same day. And so Tesla is beating these companies on all fronts. They tried to basically run this Tesla playbook of come out with your premium vehicle, get some sales going on the premium vehicle, get the gross margins going, and then get ready to introduce another vehicle, which unfortunately for them, it's not a mid-tier vehicle they were going after, like what Rivian's doing in their next generation. They're going after another high-tier SUV. And it's just going to be a struggle between now and then. They're either going to get floated by cash infusions to stay afloat, or they'll either get sold, or they have some interesting assets. We've had this conversation about Rivian, but with Lucid, I think they have some interesting assets around power management. They actually do a very good job in terms of power management and battery performance and energy usage in their cars. And so there's a couple of things there I think would be interesting with the powertrain and power management. They may be interesting to a company right now that's struggling to make an EV, or maybe there's a tech company that wants to make an EV. So they could be an acquisition target. But right now, I think people are concerned. What am I buying? Can this thing be, taken care of under warranty? And there's just better options out there. And I would say this is not a good time, at 8% or more, to be financing vehicles up at this price tier. It's not going to go as well.
I've heard much more of people support Rivian, and they just don't think Lucid will make it, except of course the Saudi investment. So, and like you said, they have some technology. It's interesting. Okay, so the next news here is very good news for electric vehicle as well as Tesla. So apparently, according to Value Analyst, he reported that the price for lithium iron phosphate is now below $70 per kilowatt hour now. That's almost a record low. 20.1% year-over-year drop in capacity utilization means lower cost ahead. So we know that we've been hearing that lithium obviously spiked last year, and that contributed to supply chain issues and cost issues. And so prices went up, and then they did price cuts, and now the cost structure might go down to improve margins. So this is a person reporting that some EV lithium ion battery cells in Chinese market are approaching record low LP below $70. This is mainly caused by falling Chinese lithium prices, overcapacity of cells. That part I don't understand, especially tier two companies. You can explain that to me. And then it says here that takeaways from the Cattle H1 first half 2023 report, ESS battery sales, I don't know what this means, 8 to 2, I don't know. Capacity utilization rates fell to 60%. Overseas business booming. Explain all this to me, Jeff. It's all gobbledygook for me.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of capacity. The backdrop is there's been a lot of capacity added for lithium cell manufacturing in China, and definitely for LFP, which is what Tesla is going to be using basically in that, call it that sub, $45,000 range, price range vehicles. And what's happened in China, so there's a macro issue happening in terms of the China reopening, the China youth unemployment rate, which they buy a lot of SUVs, these call it 20 to 30 somethings. The youth unemployment is, I think, near at an all-time high in China. So you have a number of different factors with slower reopening, the youth unemployment in China, and really just an overcapacity in terms of their build out. And you put all those factors together, and what happens, what I've always talked about on some of your prior shows, Herbert, it's really important for factories to be 70 to 80% utilized to keep their cost structure in line, and to make sure they're getting good fixed cost utilization. And as soon as you drop below that, and you drop meaningfully below that, now all of your fixed costs start weighing more heavily on each unit that goes out the door, each unit you produce that goes out the door. Your utilization is lower. Your output per labor per individual, your output per capital installed in the factory all reduces. And so basically every piece of capital and every piece of labor, the content in each one of those cells goes up in terms of their cost allocation and content. So then you run into a cost issue. So now they have to play this game of chicken and basically lower their prices to bring in more buyers so they can get their utilization pushed back up. They push their utilization back up, then they can keep their prices and their gross margins in line. This is what Tesla has actually been doing in terms for the last year to keep their factories fully loaded and the new ones growing. They've been running and they've been lowering MSRPs to make sure they continue clearing inventory. So this is what they're doing right now on the lithium side, and this may be what's happening with the spot pricing. But we're not dealing with the spot pricing every day, but there will be contract renegotiations that occur, and Tesla will be in the front of each one of those lines because they're buying the most product. They're the single company I would believe in this space that would be buying the most product in this space. So I think Tesla will be in a very good position here to capitalize it. That's why I'd like to see, because we're going to get this Q3 here where we have a couple of weeks of shutdown, or a couple of days, maybe over a week or extended period of shutdown. We're going to use inventory cars from the prior quarter. So we're not going to see many of the most recent cost reductions. We will in about 70 or 80% of the production for the quarter, but there will be a decent chunk of older production. But this is where I'd like to see Tesla capitalize on this and really pull ahead and be able to either increase their margins, or if they have to lower prices, they can lower them, knowing that they've been reducing their cost structure. So that's what's happening. They're trying to keep their utilization up to keep their cost structure in line, but it's a real problem. And if the Chinese economy doesn't improve, there's going to be some big problems with how these factories have been financed, their over capacitization. Like this could really turn into a huge problem. The only thing that's really saving them here is the EV adoption rate, again, being so high in China and being pretty decent and high in the US and Europe. That's what's saving them right now.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I hopefully, though, some of this will translate to Q3, but if not, it will definitely translate to Q4, very likely, right? All this is
Yep, I believe so.
Several months as well. All right, so some fun bit of news here. We've got more and more reports of the CyberTruck. We've seen them everywhere now. We're seeing shots out there, and this one kind of leaked as CyberTruck being produced, and you can actually see the frunk. Some people think the frunk's a little small, but let's go take a quick look at it. It's a very short clip. Let's take a look. All right, so let me just...
Yeah.
I'm going to put it to the very front so you can actually see the frunk here. Boom, right there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so here's what I believe is happening. So number one, when I look at the factory, typical factory, electrical dropping, lighting dropping from the ceiling, very high ceilings. This looks like offline. This looks like a repair area, number one. This isn't, these cars are not straight configured going down a production line. Looks like a repair area. The second thing I notice is I can see behind the frunk, and I'm looking at that front motor, and I'm looking at what's behind the frunk in a Model S or X. I'm seeing it right now in this car with the way the frunk. So I believe the frunk has actually been pulled out, and there's repair. Okay. There's a repair action happening behind the. This is what I believe is happening.
Yeah.
So I believe that when that frunk will be pushing, is it going to be the biggest frunk on the market? Probably not. I hope that's not your purchase decision for a Cybertruck. I hope you're looking at total volumetric area and cargo. But I believe this is me looking at a picture. I believe this is a repair area, and I believe that car is under repair. The frunk has been detached, and there's a repair action happening behind the frunk.
Nice. Okay. Thank you, Jeff, because everybody kept talking about how tiny it looks, and it does sure look like. I hope you're right. It does look like it was pulled out. Fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. But then, This is happening. And like you said, total volumetric area. Appreciate you're using the right terminology there, because we know that the 6-foot bed is much bigger than the F-150. If the F-150 has a better frunk, we'll see how this compares, but I'm pretty confident that Cybertruck will still land ahead. But of course, everybody's kind of waiting to see. Some very big news here, I think, is great for us to hear about. Is that can you actually buy in Colorado a Tesla Model 3 real-wheel drive for $13,740? How is that possible? Well, because Colorado has significant number of incentives and discounts that could be worth up to $26,500. Why is that? Well, apparently the reason why it's happening in Colorado is because there's they apparently the government there is against the restrictions on and the punishment to the existing gas cars, and so instead they've upped the incentives for adopting an electric vehicle. So, and it's part of their thing. So why is Colorado offering so many EV incentives? It's basically what I just said. They have a goal. They want to meet these targets. They want to hit at a far faster pace in the second quarter of 2023. So they've added even more incentives. The government's administration has set a goal to reach 25% by 2025. That's great. That's a good number instead of just the current 10% or 8% in the US. And in the meantime, they're fighting against the reduction, and they don't want to adopt California's plan to ban gasoline car sales. So, obviously, the question is who can qualify for those extra incentives. It's going to go live in August, but it's low and medium income residents, but also apparently people that have an eligible trade-in vehicle. So they must have failed an emissions test or at least 12 years old. That's who can get the extra $6,000, and then off a new plug-in or hybrid or electric vehicle, or $4,000 off a used plug-in hybrid. Okay, so it's all that. And then Elon replied and he said, "Really? Is this true? And then Sawyer, who reported it, said, yes, the new program goes live this month. I don't know how many people would realistically qualify, but it will be possible to get a new Model 3 for under $14,000 for those eligible. So then Elon asked his team, and his team told him, I'm told by my team, that the credits are not currently stackable. So the best case is $20,000. But Jeff, still, that is crazy. You can buy a Tesla Model 3. Of course, you have to have the low income and so forth. But for $20,000, a Model 3, I paid $55,000. That's with FSD, all this extra goodies and all that. But this is a good car for $20,000.
Great car, and you have the TCA crash ratings top in its class. Benchmark acceleration. It drives wonderfully. So yeah, $20,000. If you look at the value per dollar you're getting in this space, and this is before you get all the savings, right, from a fuel economy perspective, it's huge. And other states are doing this. Even localities inside of states, local county governments also have their own incentive programs. Joe's talked about this from Tesla owners of San Joaquin Valley. He's talked about this as well, and advertise it for his local area. And it's great. I mean, in Illinois, for example, there's an additional, I don't know, it's off and on throughout the year, but there's an additional $4,000 credit from the state of Illinois that actually just gets sent to you, I think, within 90 days of purchasing your vehicle. And they send you a check if you qualify, and it's similar qualifications to the federal credit. So we're in this zone right now. Next month is September. We're essentially in this zone of about 4 months until we get into the new year, where the federal credit moves to the point of sale. And I think that's just going to be another powerful magnet for the EV market. And I don't think there's going to be this big cliff in Q4. I think people are still going to go buy the car in Q4 because they're only going to have, they're going to get their payment, they're going to get their refund as part of their tax refund just a couple months later. So they may have a couple of payments they have to deal with that are higher, but then they'll get their tax refund just a couple months later. So the IRA credit started in the beginning of this year. There was some confusion. It really didn't get solidified until maybe March. There was still some confusion after that. I think we're really starting to get in this drumbeat now. And this is why you're seeing so many purchases of the Model 3 and the Model Y. And again, with the credit moving to point of sale early next year, I think that's just going to accelerate. So hats off. I think Colorado's taking the right approach, because if you put disincentives on gasoline vehicles too much, now you're going to take that industry and you're going to like prematurely crush it, and you're going to crush all the labor and all the capital that's currently involved with that, versus giving it kind of an off ramp to go from ICE to EV. I think they have a good approach in Colorado.
Yeah, so Sawyer clarified it. It says there's a 7,500 federal incentive, which we're all aware of. There's a 5,000 Colorado credit. Then there's 2,500 low-cost Colorado credit, and the 6,000 Colorado vehicle exchange. They're all stackable, so you can get $21,000. But this extra 5,500 Xcel energy rebate cannot be stacked with those. And then he said a new EV plan is being submitted. So in May, so maybe something like that will change, but still $20,000. Okay, the next story here is this is an old one. We know that with Giga Mexico being on board, Tesla's been asking its Chinese suppliers to set up around Giga Mexico. We've already reported in the past that there's at least 21 companies that have raised billions of dollars to create factories around the Giga Mexico. Many of them are Chinese suppliers. And so this new news here is just simply saying that 3 executives with Chinese car parts companies, they told this Chinese newspaper outlet that they were invited by Tesla to build factories in Mexico. It's a win-win scenario. Yeah, so it's obviously very interesting. What do you think, Jeff? I mean, this is all right in line with you. You know quite a bit about the supply chain. They're probably giving them lots of incentive and wanting to move forward, right?
I don't know about that. I actually think the incentives are this is how Tesla is going to claw back cost reductions in current quarter, and I think in Q4. is they're going to tell these suppliers, look, first off, I don't think it's only Chinese suppliers. I think it's U.S. suppliers. In fact, the U.S. suppliers would be a much more natural fit to set up an operation in Mexico than Chinese suppliers coming over to Mexico. Not that it's unheard of. It's happened. It's happened in the last decade, but for decades prior, U.S. companies and Canadian companies were the ones setting up manufacturing in Mexico. So I actually think those companies are in a beauty contest right now. They're competing against each other for the right to set up and how much capacity they're going to be awarded. Tesla's got to give them an early indication of what's the annual run rate and what share do we think we're going to offer you. And all these different things are little bars or hurdles. So first off, the first hurdle is can I be invited to Mexico to set up an operation? Boom, that's one thing. Okay, what are you going to give me in the current quarter? That's what Tesla should be asking these companies. What can you give me right now in the Model Y? What can you give me on the 3? I need price reductions. I'm going to give you this in the future. You're going to get it. I'm good for it. I've been good for it the last 3 years. This is how Tesla should be talking to these suppliers. Everything I've asked for, I've actually taken, and I've actually taken more. So I think there's a bar to just be invited to be a supplier for Tesla in the Mexico facility, because it's going to be a very big facility. The next bar is how much share am I going to get as a supplier? So Tesla's not going to single source with any of these major commodities down there. They're going to have two sources come down. They're going to have them competing with each other endlessly. So now you're going to have two suppliers. You may have three suppliers most likely. And in that situation, you want to do something like a 40-30 or 40-40 and a 20, or a 45-45 and a 10% share award. So you have a third player in the mix that is given some incentives to get down there to build. Again, not that Tesla's giving them money, but they're more incenting them on share. And maybe they can move up from being a minority share to a majority share. And that's what you want. You want that third supplier or second supplier that can be hungry to move from minority share to majority share. So there's actually a lot going on here. I think there's a number of hurdles that Tesla can set up to not only get concessions from these suppliers to participate in Mexico, but also give them real-time reductions on 3 and Y and even S and X right now. So that's what I would be doing if I were in the Tesla supply chain, and knowing the people that are running these operations. I'm confident that they're gaining significant leverage by doing this. This is a great position to be in, because sometimes it's difficult to go into conversations with suppliers, especially if your product line's not doing well. Let's say you're the Ford supply chain. You have to go in and talk about the F-150. You have to talk about the Mach-E, and you have 100 days of inventory when you plan to have 50. And you have all these factory changeovers, and you're taking your costs down. So the Tesla supply chain is in a a highly levered position with these suppliers. So I hope I believe that they're getting great leverage for 3 and Y now. And I think then this conversation will move to when they're setting up those factories. Now they're going to be having conversations about the bot and doing supplier awards on the bot. So it's just for Tesla, it's one thing after another. I think from a portfolio perspective, they've really set their supply chain up very well to do well with their supply. And the suppliers aren't just they're not getting, screwed here. They're getting a lot of business. They get the work on the number one model in the auto business.
And it's going to be a massive factory. So while we have not yet heard that there's a groundbreaking for Giga Nuevo Leon, it's still kind of delayed at this point. It's now August. You can see continued discussions. You can see suppliers being contacted, and they're all moving forward. So a lot of these things are still moving, despite the fact that it hasn't been officially launched. So I'm still pretty hopeful at this point that it's still going to launch in the Q4 of next year rather than Q1 of 2025. We'll see if we hear more about that.
And if I'm Tesla, I tell suppliers, don't worry about the groundbreaking schedule. I want you on time. I want you running. I want you at cost. I want you at quality. And if for whatever reason my factory down there isn't working, I'll send your parts up to Texas.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Okay, last story of the day here is 4 in 10 U.S. adults. A most recent survey that 4 in 10 say next vehicle may be electric. So this article is positioning this as a negative, saying that only 4 in 10, not many, are not yet sold and going electric. And then they did confirm that 8% say that they or someone in their household owns or leases an electric vehicle, which is in line with the actual statistics. But only 19% say it's very or that they are very or extremely likely they would purchase an EV the next time they buy a car. 22% say it's somewhat likely that they will. So if you add them up, that's 22 plus 20, 44 for 40%. That's 5% higher from last year, but it just means that many still aren't quite there yet. You had a very good point about this, Jeff. Go ahead and share that with us.
All of those numbers are good because right now, 7 or 8 in 100 people today are actually buying an EV in the US. So in those stats, if it gets somewhere in the 20, if that's in the 20, that's the next generation of buyers. You're talking about tripling the current EV adoption rate in the US, which would be gigantic. If it goes to 40%, that's a 6x over where we're at today. So any one of those numbers is good. So that article was from it was from the Q2 timeframe, and they continue to do these surveys. And by the way, there's this thing going on in the media right now where, again, it's not going well for big auto. They're not doing well with their EV offerings. They're too high priced. They can't move on the MSRPs, or they lose too much money. They give hundreds of millions of dollars to these news outlets, CNBC, NBC Universal, Yahoo. Hundreds of millions of dollars go from Ford, GM, Stellantis to these companies for ad revenue buy. So they're trying to put a message out there that EVs aren't so great. Just wait, there'll be better EVs basically in a couple of years when we're better at our cost structure. Meanwhile, Tesla is building their equivalent Model Y vehicle. They have a $47,000 offering. That's $40,000 with the tax credit. And the Cadillac Lyrics in the 60s, the Polestars in the $80,000 range. And that's where they're at right now from a cost structure perspective. So this is how this all plays together. But that stat is a very encouraging stat when you're only at 7% adoption today.
I love it. Yep. Very good points. Thank you, Jeff, very much. So a couple points here. One is please follow Jeff at the Jeff Lutz on Twitter. He is an absolute gem. He's got so much information, as you can see. I've already mentioned before that he's a high-level consultant for big Fortune 100 companies. We're very lucky every time we get his hour to share his knowledge and supply chain. And it's very critical for us Tesla investors. As you see, everything is about manufacturing. Everything is about production. And Jeff can share his knowledge. I think my mic continues to pop. This has been happening for a lot of our shows. I've done everything. I've fixed everything. I'm buying a new computer. I'm trying to solve it. And I thought I had already solved because I rebuilt everything. And apparently it's still happening this episode. Thank you for sticking with me. And thank you very much. Appreciate you, Jeff. That was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Herbert.
Hey there. Thank you for joining me. If you can, please consider supporting this channel so I can keep it going. It's a lot of work arranging all these amazing interviews. One of the easiest ways is just to click that join button and become a member of the channel. Thank you very much. Let's get brighter.